In the shrouded darkness of Blackridge, the wind howled, as if tearing the sky apart. Claire walked forward, eyes burning with determination, her hand gripping the USB that could bury an entire criminal empire. In the distance, Rex growled, guarding her from the shadow drawing closer. One wrong move, and everything would end in eternal silence. Subscribe now so you won't miss our next breathtaking episodes. The wind howled like a living thing. It wasn't just noise. It was a voice shrieking across the jagged ridges of Blackridge, as if the mountains themselves were warning anyone foolish enough to be here. Snow drove sideways, tearing at the face, stealing breath with every gust. It was the kind of night that could swallow a man whole and never bother to return him. Logan Hart leaned into the storm, one gloved hand gripping the leash of the Malinois at his side. Rex pulled forward eagerly, head low, ears flattened against the wind. His breath plumed in thick clouds that vanished almost instantly into the whiteout. Logan had long ago learned to trust the dog's instincts. Rex saw and heard what humans couldn't even in hellish weather like this. The radio strapped to Logan's chest crackled with a faint signal barely audible over the storm. It wasn't a voice, not exactly just a ping. The kind of emergency beacon that could have been tripped by a lost hiker or a faulty transmitter. Under normal circumstances, they would have waited until morning. But Blackridge's storms didn't leave room for normal circumstances. If someone was out here tonight, they wouldn't last until dawn. Logan adjusted the beam of his flashlight, the light carving only a few feet into the swirling dark. The snow was knee-deep in places, crusted over with ice that cracked under his boots. He moved like a man crossing a battlefield, every step deliberate, every muscle braced. Rex's ears twitched. The dog stopped suddenly, his body going rigid. Logan crouched, following the line of Rex's nose into the white murk. "What is it, boy?" The wind shifted. For a heartbeat, Logan thought he saw something, a shape upright, too still to be a tree. Then it was gone, swallowed by the snow. His stomach tightened. "Let's move." They pushed forward, the cold slicing into his bones despite the layers. The beam of the flashlight swept across jagged rock and snow-swept pines. And then it hit something that didn't belong. A figure. Logan's mind cataloged the scene in seconds. A woman lashed to a rusted steel post, her head slumped forward, hair crusted with ice, the pale oval of her face barely visible under frost. Her lips were blue. Even from here, he could see the way her chest rose barely under the heavy coat that wasn't hers. Jesus! He was already moving the beam, jerking wildly as he closed the distance. Rex bounded ahead, snow exploding around his legs. Ma'am Logan's voice was raw in the wind. No reaction. Up close, it was worse. The rope binding her wrists was digging into raw skin, the strands stiff with frozen blood. Her head lolled when he touched her shoulder. She was breathing, but shallow, each exhale a thin ribbon of vapor. Logan's knife was in his hand before he realized he'd drawn it. The blade bit into the rope, sawing quickly until it gave way with a snap. The woman sagged into him, her weight limp and frighteningly light. "Stay with me," he muttered, pulling her close. He stripped off his own parka, wrapping it around her shoulders. She shivered weakly, a faint sound, half gasp, half moan escaping her lips. Rex was there, instantly pressing against her side, his tongue working over her cheek as if he could lick the cold out of her. The woman's head shifted, her eyes fluttering open, just a sliver. "Easy," Logan said, scanning the darkness beyond them. The storm was a perfect cover for whoever had left her here, and for whoever might still be nearby. That was when he heard it, a sound that didn't belong to the storm, faint but distinct. The crunch of boots on crusted snow somewhere upslope. Logan froze. His gaze tracked upward past the swirl of snowflakes toward the black line of the ridge. A figure stood there only for an instant, a dark silhouette against the gray sky, then was gone, melting back into the storm. Every muscle in Logan's body went taut. Rex growled low, his fur bristling. Whoever it was, they'd been watching. Logan didn't wait to see if they were coming closer. He hitched the woman higher in his arms, her head lolling against his shoulder. "We're moving, Rex. Now." The dog surged ahead, clearing a path through the drifts. Logan followed his boots, punching deep holes into the snow, his breath burning in his lungs. The wind clawed at them, trying to shove them back toward the ridge, toward the place where the shadow had been. They reached the tree line, a ragged wall of black pines looming like sentinels. The forest gave them a little shelter from the worst of the wind, but the silence here was heavier, broken only by the muffled crunch of their footsteps. Logan risked a glance over his shoulder. Nothing. No figure on the ridge, no movement in the white void. That didn't mean they were alone. He shifted the woman again, feeling the tremor of her shallow breaths against his chest. She was freezing from the inside out. If he didn't get her somewhere warm soon, she wouldn't last. "Hang in there," he murmured. He didn't know her name yet, didn't know what had been done to her, but he knew one thing: someone had tied her up out here to die. And that someone might still be tracking them. The storm roared in the treetops, drowning the world in its relentless voice. Logan pushed deeper into the woods, following a path only he and Rex seemed to know, every nerve in his body screaming that they were being hunted. And somewhere back on that ridge, he had the unshakable feeling that a pair of eyes was still watching. The cabin stood like a shadowed sentinel against the endless white, its rough-hewn logs, dark with age, roof crowned by a burden of snow. The wind screamed through the pines, flinging icy shards into Logan Hart's face as he pushed the door open with his shoulder. Rex bounded in first, tail low, nose twitching like a radar locked on every scent in the room. Logan stepped inside with Claire Monroe cradled in his arms, her weight too light for someone still alive. The warmth hit him immediately, the faint lingering scent of cedar and ash from winters long past. This place hadn't been touched in years, not since Owen Miller died in that climbing accident that Logan never truly believed was an accident. He kicked the door shut with his boot, sealing out the storm. The walls groaned faintly under the assault of the wind, as if the cabin itself remembered what it meant to endure. He set Claire gently onto the worn leather couch near the stone fireplace. Her skin was paper-pale, lips tinged blue, breath shallow. Logan stripped off his gloves, grabbed the bundle of kindling stacked by the hearth, and began feeding the fire he'd lit minutes before they arrived. Flames licked upward, spilling gold across the room, casting Rex's silhouette in sharp relief against the far wall. Claire stirred. Her eyelids fluttered, a flicker of confusion crossing her face before she sucked in a ragged breath. "You're safe." Logan said, his voice low but firm, the kind that carried the weight of truth because it didn't pretend. She blinked at him, trying to focus. Where am I? Cabin in the foothills. Off the grid. Nobody knows it's here." Her gaze darted around the room, the antlers mounted above the mantel, the shelves lined with weathered books and tins of coffee long past their expiration. You pulled me out of there. Couldn't just leave you to freeze." She shifted, wincing as pain lanced through her shoulder. I was close to getting something big. That's why they came after me." Logan leaned forward. "Who?" Her eyes met his, and in that moment he saw the steel beneath her exhaustion. "I've been investigating a shell company tied to Northfield Energy. They've been funneling money into offshore accounts, masking it through environmental cleanup projects that don't exist. My team started digging into the ledgers. Now, they're all dead. Car accidents, gas leaks, suicide notes that don't match their handwriting." Her voice cracked, not from fear, but from rage. "I'm the last one." Logan's jaw tightened. Northfield Energy, he'd heard the name whispered during his FBI years, always in connection to politicians who never got indicted and witnesses who never lived long enough to testify. "Do they know you're alive?" he asked. She shook her head. "Not for long, but they'll be looking." Rex's ears pricked, his whole body going still. Then came the sound, faint, deliberate, carried on the wind. Footsteps and snow. Not the random crunch of a stray animal, but the steady rhythm of someone trained to move quietly. Logan froze. Years of fieldwork had taught him that predators didn't always kick down the door. Sometimes they waited patient as frost until you thought you were safe. He reached behind the couch, pulling out the old Winchester Owen had kept here. Not his first choice, but it would punch through a wall if it had to. "You have a gun," Claire whispered. "Not enough of them," he said. "Stay here." He slipped to the window, keeping low. The firelight painted his shadow on the wood floor, but outside was nothing but darkness layered with falling snow. Then his eyes caught it, half a boot print just beyond the porch, its tread deep and distinct before the storm began filling it in. Military issue, not store-bought knockoffs. Whoever was out there knew their way around a rifle. Rex growled a low rumble that vibrated through the floorboards. Logan raised a hand to keep him quiet, but the dog's hackles were already up. The print faced toward the cabin. Whoever it belonged to had been standing there watching. He moved to the door, eased it open, just enough to slip through. The cold clawed at his face, the snow crunching softly under his weight. He knelt by the print, tracing its edge with his gloved finger. Half an inch deeper on the heel, the carrier was loaded with gear heavy, maybe over 6 feet, judging by the stride, disciplined, deliberate. The storm made visibility useless, but Logan had something better: his silence. He closed his eyes, tuning out the wind, listening for anything that didn't belong. Their faint maybe 50 yards out the snap of a branch. Logan moved back inside. "We're not alone," he said. Claire's hands tightened in the blanket. "Then we have to go." "No," he replied. "In this weather, running means dying faster. We hold here until I know what we're dealing with." She swallowed hard, nodding. Her eyes flicked toward Rex, who sat facing the door like a sentry carved from muscle and instinct. "Your dog? He seems to know." "He's saved my life more times than I can count," Logan said. "If he says danger's coming, believe him." The fire popped, sending a burst of sparks up the chimney. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the smell of something metallic, faint but sharp gun oil. Logan felt it in his bones before he could name it. Whoever was out there wasn't here to scare them. They were here to finish what someone else had started in that abandoned clearing. Claire reached for the small satchel at her side, pulling out a waterproof folder. "This is all I've got left. Files, photos, account numbers. If I disappear, it can't." Logan took it, his mind cataloging every piece of information it could hold. "You're not disappearing on my watch. You don't know how far they'll go." "I've seen it. And I've stopped worse." Rex stood moving to the window. A shadow crossed the snow line, gone in an instant, but real. Logan caught it too. They were testing the perimeter. He loaded the Winchester, chambering around with a smooth, practiced motion. "If they come through that door, don't think. Just drop." Claire's breath hitched. "And if they don't, then they're waiting for us to make the wrong move." The cabin seemed to shrink with every passing minute, the storm outside a living thing, pressing against the walls. The ticking of the old clock over the mantel grew louder, each second marking the space between stillness and violence. Rex paced once, then sat again, his eyes never leaving the door. Logan thought of Owen, how they'd sat in this same room one winter, a bottle of bourbon between them, laughing about the kind of trouble that could get a man killed. The thought tightened something in his chest. If this was where it ended, he'd make sure it ended on his terms. Another sound closer this time. Snow shifting under weight, the creak of a step on the porch. Logan's fingers slid to the trigger. He exchanged a glance with Rex. The dog's lips peeled back in silence. Then, nothing. The sound cut off, swallowed by the storm. Minutes bled by. Logan didn't move. Predators could wait hours. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "They're not going away." Claire's gaze hardened. "Neither am I." The firelight danced across her face, revealing not just the fear, but the stubborn defiance that had kept her alive this long. Outside, somewhere beyond the walls, death waited with patience. Inside, Logan Hart, Claire Monroe, and a dog named Rex sat in the eye of the storm, knowing the night was far from over. The wind had changed. Logan Hart felt it in his bones long before the sound reached his ears. It was the way the pines stiffened their branches, rattling like brittle bones in the cold. The storm hadn't passed, it was only gathering strength again, wrapping the Blackridge wilderness in a suffocating shroud. Inside the cabin, the dim fire cast restless shadows on the log walls. Claire Monroe sat hunched on the couch, wrapped in the old wool blanket Logan had thrown over her. Her lips were still pale, her breathing shallow. Rex, ever watchful, sat by her feet, his amber eyes tracking every flicker of movement beyond the frost-laced windows. Logan knew the cabin wouldn't hold. Not against the kind of men who had tied Claire to a steel post in sub-zero wind. Those kinds of men didn't let loose ends breathe. "We can't stay," he said quietly, his voice low but edged with urgency. Claire looked up, her eyes searching his face. She was still gathering herself, still trying to piece together the fragments of thought that trauma had scattered. They'll be looking for me," she whispered. They already are," Logan cut in. He moved to the table where his old rucksack lay open and began packing without hesitation. 2 bottles of water, a small medical kit, a flare gun with a single round. His sidearm cleaned, loaded, ready. "If we wait for them to come here, we're done." Claire swallowed, nodding faintly. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." He zipped the bag shut, then slung it over his shoulder. "You'd be surprised." Rex let out a low, throaty rumble. Not a bark, something far more instinctive. Logan crossed to the window and peered into the white swirl outside. The trees shivered under the weight of the storm, but between the flashes of moving snow, he thought he saw shapes. Decision made. He grabbed Claire's coat from the back of a chair and crouched beside her. "We leave now." "Can you walk?" She hesitated, then pushed herself to her feet. Her legs wobbled, but determination burned in her eyes. "Where?" North Ridge, Logan said, opening the cabin door just wide enough to slip through. There's a ravine there. Less wind, fewer eyes. Rex went first, his paws sinking into the powder head lowered as he scanned the whiteness ahead. Logan followed his hand, steadying Claire as she stumbled into the knee-deep snow. The cold slammed into them like a living thing, stealing breath, clawing through their clothes. The forest closed around them, tall and black against the bleached night. The crunch of their boots was swallowed almost immediately by the wind. After a few hundred yards, Claire's breathing turned ragged. Logan slowed their pace, keeping his voice low. "Talk to me. Keep your mind sharp." She glanced at him, then away, as if the words she carried weighed more than her frozen limbs. "I wasn't supposed to be there last night," she began. "The meeting?" It was off the record. "A friend in internal audit told me they'd found discrepancies millions unaccounted for. I've been digging into Trans-North Energy for months. Offshore accounts, shell companies. And then I found something worse." Her voice caught. Logan glanced at her but said nothing, letting her push through the memory. "They've been laundering money for years," she went on, "through contractors, dummy projects, even disaster relief funds. And the names..." She shivered, but it wasn't from the cold. "They're not just corporate execs. Politicians, judges, people you see on TV." Logan's jaw tightened. He'd seen that pattern before, always the same rot buried deep and guarded by men who smiled for cameras. "You said you had files." "Said you had..." "I hid them," she said. "The night before they took me, I uploaded everything to a secure drive. But the access key, it's not digital. It's on paper, in a safe place." "Where?" She hesitated. "Somewhere they'll never think to look. Somewhere I have to get to before they do." Rex suddenly veered to the right, nose to the ground. Logan followed, steering Claire toward a narrow, barely visible trail that twisted between snow-burdened spruces. The path was shielded from above its entrance, marked by a fallen trunk half buried in frost. "This way," Logan murmured. "Fewer prints. They can't track what they can't see." The going was slow. Snow clung to their legs, and the air grew sharper, cutting at exposed skin. Claire stumbled once, nearly going to her knees, but Logan caught her before she hit the ground. "You've done this before," she managed between breaths. "Too many times," he replied. Hours seemed to fold into minutes as they pressed on. The storm thickened the world, narrowing to the beam of Logan's headlamp and the dark form of Rex leading them. Somewhere behind, faint and nearly lost in the howl of wind, came the muffled crack of something like a branch snapping. But it didn't fit the rhythm of the storm. They kept moving. By the time darkness pressed fully against the forest, the temperature had plummeted even further. Logan scanned their surroundings for any kind of shelter. That's when he saw it, an outcrop of rock jutting from the slope ahead, its base hollowed by time and weather into a shallow cave. Rex darted forward, sniffing the entrance before giving a short, sharp bark. "Clear." "Inside," Logan ordered. The cave was small, barely large enough for the three of them. The stone walls radiated a deep, ancient cold. But they cut the wind, and in the wilderness, that could mean the difference between living through the night or freezing before dawn. Logan shrugged off his pack, pulling out the emergency blanket and wrapping it around Claire. "Sit close to the wall, out of the draft." She sank down, pulling the blanket tight, her breath visible in quick white bursts. "You saved my life out there," she said quietly. "You're not out of danger yet." Rex curled beside her, his body heat a steady grounding presence. Claire's hand moved instinctively to rest on his fur. She looked smaller in that moment, her strength hidden beneath layers of exhaustion and fear. "You think they'll follow us this far?" she asked. Logan met her gaze. "They won't stop until they've erased everything you know." The words landed heavy in the stillness, broken only by the wind moaning through the narrow cave entrance. Logan turned his attention to the darkness outside, listening, waiting. Somewhere in the storm, predators, human ones, were closing in. He'd been in their world once. He knew how they thought, and he knew what they were capable of when someone threatened the empire they'd built on lies. That was why they had to keep moving. But for now, for these few stolen hours in the frozen dark, they had only one task: survive the night. Claire shifted slightly under the blanket. "Logan, why are you helping me?" He didn't answer right away. His eyes stayed fixed on the entrance, his mind tracking every flicker of shadow beyond the snow. Finally, he said, "Because once someone found me half dead in a place just like that steel post you were tied to. And they didn't ask questions. They just cut me free." Silence stretched between them. Then Claire leaned back against the stone, eyes heavy. Rex's breathing was slow, steady, the warmth of him spilling into the air between them. Outside, the storm clawed at the mountains. And somewhere out there, boots crunched in the snow following a trail they thought they could erase. Logan knew better. Snow crunched under Logan's boots as the first pale wash of daylight bled across the treetops. The cave's stone mouth gaped behind them, steam from their breath lingering in the frigid air like ghosts reluctant to leave. Claire followed close, pulling the borrowed parka tighter around her shoulders. Rex trotted a few paces ahead, ears swiveling at every faint rustle, his breath puffing in rhythmic clouds. They hadn't gone more than 100 yards when the first sound came, a muffled hiss, sharp and wrong, against the natural hush of the forest. Logan's instincts, honed from years of covert operations, reacted before his mind had fully processed it. Down he barked, shoving Claire toward the shelter of a snowbank. A second hiss followed, snow exploding in a puff where her head had been a moment before. Suppressed fire. Not the random pop of a hunter's rifle, this was precise, measured, and aimed to kill. Logan rolled, bringing his own weapon up, scanning the ridgeline. Shadows moved at the crest, low and coordinated. Whoever was after them had closed the distance overnight. Rex's growl rolled low and dangerous from his chest, the hackles along his back lifting like a wave. Then Logan saw it, movement breaking away from the ridge, slipping through the trees toward their flank. A closer threat. The figure burst from the undergrowth, black tactical gear, face masked, a short-barreled weapon coming up. In that split second, Claire froze, eyes wide. She saw the barrel level at her chest. She didn't see Rex move, only felt the rush of air as the dog launched himself between her and the gunman. The impact was brutal. Rex hit the man full in the torso, teeth snapping onto the padded arm, twisting his body off balance. The shot went wild, thudding into a tree trunk inches from Claire's head. The gunman grunted, stumbling back as Rex's jaws clamped harder, his weight dragging the man down into the snow. Logan didn't hesitate. He broke from cover, 2 quick shots echoing with muted coughs from his pistol. The first struck the man's thigh, the second his shoulder. The attacker dropped hard, weapons skidding away. Rex released only when Logan's sharp command cut through the chaos. Claire's heart hammered in her ears. She was still crouched, breath-shaking, staring at the animal in front of her, not as a trained asset, not as an extension of law enforcement, but as something terrifyingly alive and willing to put itself in the path of a bullet for her. Logan grabbed her arm. "We move now." More shots cracked from the ridge, snapping through branches. Snow showered down in glittering cascades. Logan steered them in a zigzag pattern, using the trees for cover. Rex stayed tight at Claire's side, muscles coiled, eyes locked forward. They reached a dip in the terrain, a shallow gully half hidden by drifted snow. Logan slid down first, motioning for Claire to follow. His breath came harder now, and when he shifted his rifle to his left side, she saw why, a dark bloom spreading across the shoulder of his jacket. "You're hit," she said, voice breaking with a mix of fear and guilt. "Just a graze," he lied, his tone flat, dismissive. "We don't stop here." From the gully, he scanned the tree line. The shooters had lost sight of them for the moment, but that wouldn't last. He pointed to a narrow slope curling down between 2 ridges. "We take that. It'll give us a blind spot from the ridge." Claire nodded, though her legs trembled. Her mind kept flashing back to Rex's leap, the blur of fur, the snarl, the weight slamming into the gunman. She'd known working dogs before in an abstract procedural way. They were tools, assets, trained to execute commands. But the heat in his eyes when he'd placed himself between her and death, that was not protocol. That was choice. They moved fast, but careful, each step sinking into knee-deep snow. Logan's pace faltered only once, when his shoulder jarred against a low branch. His breath hissed through clenched teeth, but he pushed on, leading them toward a thicker pocket of forest. Behind them, faint voices barked orders too far to make out words, but close enough to mean pursuit. Logan knew they had maybe 10 minutes before the ambush team repositioned. The slope funneled them into a shallow ravine. The air felt colder here, heavy with the scent of pine sap and frozen earth. Rex paused at the entrance nose, testing the air. Then, with a quick glance back, he bounded ahead, scouting the path. Claire risked a glance at Logan's wound. Blood had soaked through the outer layer, freezing in the cold, but the flow had slowed. Still, his skin was pale beneath the stubble, his jaw set against pain. "You should," she started. "Save it," he cut in, eyes scanning the tree line. "Talk later." The ravine ended abruptly in a wall of rock slicked with ice. Logan cursed under his breath. They'd have to climb, and quickly. He tested the surface boots, finding narrow holds. He went first, slinging his rifle across his back, then reached down to help Claire. Her gloves slipped once, sending a burst of snow down her sleeve, but she bit back the panic and forced herself upward. Rex waited below, tail flicking anxiously, until Logan gave the hand signal. The dog took 3 running strides and leapt, claws scrabbling at the rock. Logan caught the harness and hauled him the rest of the way. At the top, the forest spread before them again. denser now, the undergrowth thicker. It would buy them some cover. Logan pointed toward a break in the trees where the snow looked undisturbed. That way. They pushed through the thicket branches, clawing at their clothes. Claire's mind worked in jagged bursts, images of the masked man. The heat of Rex's body against hers, the look in Logan's eyes when he realized they were boxed in. She hadn't felt this hunted since she'd found the first piece of evidence that had gotten her into this mess. "You saved me," she said, suddenly glancing at Rex. The dog flicked an ear but kept moving. "He's done it before," Logan said, not breaking stride. "But usually for me." I thought Claire swallowed. I thought dogs like him didn't think like that. That it was all training. Logan shot her a brief look. "You'd be surprised what they decide for themselves when it counts." The voices behind them grew louder, again echoing strangely through the trees. Logan picked up the pace, angling toward a narrow ridgeline. If they could make it to the other side, the terrain would splinter the sound and scent trail, but the injury slowed him. Claire noticed now how his left arm stayed rigid, how he favored his right side when breaking through the brush. Without thinking, she moved to take point, letting Rex range slightly ahead. Logan didn't protest. They reached the ridgeline just as a fresh volley of suppressed shots ripped through the trees below. Bark, splintered snow cascaded. Logan shoved Claire down behind a fallen trunk, dropping beside her. Rex pressed in tight body, vibrating with tension. "They're close," Logan murmured, breath visible in short, sharp bursts. "We'll have to lose them in the low ground." He mapped it quickly in his head, down the ridge across the frozen stream, then up into the opposite rise, where the rock formations would block a clean shot. Risky, but better than staying here. When they moved again, it was at a crouch, feet silent on the snowpack. The stream appeared sooner than Claire expected, a ribbon of ice glazed over with wind-blown powder. Rex crossed first claws, skittering for purchase, then turned to watch them. Halfway across, Logan's boot punched through a weak spot. The sound cracked like a whip in the stillness. He yanked free before the ice could give way further, but the noise was enough. Shouts rose from behind, sharper now, closer. They ran the last stretch, scrambling up the far slope. Claire's lungs burned her legs heavy. At the top, Logan dropped to one knee, scanning back through the scope. The attackers were ghosts between the trees, but he counted at least 4. Too many for a stand. They had to keep moving. By the time they found a shallow overhang to shelter in, the adrenaline had ebbed just enough for Claire to feel the cold seeping into her bones. Rex settled beside her, pressing his warmth into her side. She rested a gloved hand on his neck, feeling the steady thump of his heartbeat. It struck her then how close she'd come to not feeling anything at all, and how a creature she'd once dismissed as just another operational asset had chosen otherwise. Logan checked his shoulder wound, wincing as he peeled back the fabric. The bleeding had slowed, but the skin was angry and swollen. Claire dug into her pack, pulling out a field dressing from the emergency kit. "Let me," she said. He hesitated, then handed over the gauze. She worked quickly, hands steady despite the tremor in her chest. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying with it the promise that their pursuers weren't far behind. When she tied off their bandage, Logan met her eyes. "We move again in 10. They'll regroup." Claire nodded. She knew the danger wasn't over, not by a long stretch. But she also knew something had shifted between them in those frantic minutes of gunfire and blood and snow. Something that might matter just as much as the evidence she carried. Somewhere out there, men with guns wanted her silenced. But here in the frozen silence beneath this overhang, she had a fighter with a rifle, a dog with a heartbeat like a war drum. And for the first time in days, a flicker of hope that, maybe just maybe, they could make it out alive. The snow had thickened again, falling in heavy wet sheets that swallowed the world in silence. Rex padded ahead, nose low, his breath puffing in quick bursts that vanished in the cold air. Logan kept one gloved hand near the grip of his rifle, the other clutching Claire's elbow to keep her steady as they trudged through the drifted terrain. Every step felt deliberate, too much noise, and they risked drawing attention. Too little urgency, and the storm would bury them. They had been walking for what felt like hours when Rex suddenly halted. His ears pricked forward, his tail stiffened. Logan froze mid-step. The dog angled sharply to the right toward a barely visible mound of snow and began pawing at the crusted surface. At first, Claire thought he had caught the scent of game, but then she noticed the subtle contour, a shallow rectangular depression hidden beneath the snow. Logan knelt, brushed away the icy layer, and found what looked like a steel hatch, its edges worn with rust, but still solid. No markings, no tracks around it. Whoever had built this had wanted it forgotten. Rex whined, pawing insistently. Logan found the latch and gave it a testing tug. It groaned, but yielded, exhaling a gust of stale cold air laced with metal and something faintly chemical. Down Rex's posture seemed to say. Claire's brow furrowed. What is this? Logan shook his head. Not on any map I've seen. But if he's leading us here, it's for a reason. The hatch opened onto a ladder, descending into darkness. Logan went first, rifle slung and flashlight in hand, his boots ringing faintly on the rungs. The air grew colder, heavier. Claire followed, clutching the metal until her hands ached. Rex bounded down with surprising ease, his nails clicking on the steel. The ladder dropped them into a narrow concrete corridor. The walls beaded with moisture, the smell stronger now, old dust and machine oil. At the far end, a heavy sliding door sat half open, the gap revealing a space beyond. Inside was a room larger than Claire expected. Rows of filing cabinets, metal shelves, and stacks of sealed crates. Faded stencils marked the crates WX12 and archival, restricted. A cracked light fixture flickered overhead, casting the room in a sickly yellow glow. Claire's breath caught. On one table lay a scatter of folders, some half open, their contents spilling across the surface. She stepped forward, drawn as if by gravity. The first folder she touched was a collection of photographs, grainy surveillance shots. Her heart lurched as she recognized the faces technicians from the weather research station. People she had shared coffee with, swapped holiday stories with. Every one of them. Gone. Some images bore timestamps just days before their reported accidents. She kept flipping. More photos, more familiar faces. The further she went, the colder her fingers felt. Logan moved around the room, scanning the perimeter for threats, but his eyes kept flicking back to her. He knew the look in her face, not just grief, but something harder, sharper. On another shelf, Rex sniffed at a battered briefcase. Logan unlatched it and found stacks of printed ledgers, bank transfer receipts, and coded transaction logs. He scanned one page, his jaw tightening. These aren't research grants, he murmured. They're laundering millions. Offshore accounts, shell companies. Claire reached for another file and froze. A glossy photograph slid into her hand. It was a candid shot. Someone in the hallway of the research station had turned mid-conversation. She knew that face better than her own reflection. It was her mentor, Dr. Howard Keene. Only here he was, with men she didn't recognize, dressed in dark, tactical gear, faces partially obscured. The caption scrawled in the margin read, Phase 2 clearance. Termination order pending. Her voice was barely audible. He tried to warn me. The weight in her chest made it hard to breathe. She pressed a hand to the table for balance. The storm outside felt distant now, as if they'd stepped into a sealed tomb of truths too dangerous to touch. Logan came beside her, scanning the papers. If this gets out, it doesn't just take down a few dirty cops or bureaucrats. It unravels the whole chain. These people don't just kill to hide secrets, they build their careers on burying bodies. Claire's throat tightened. They took everyone, and they're not going to stop. Rex let out a low growl, ears rotating toward the corridor. Logan froze, listening. The distant scrape of metal echoed up from the ladder shaft. They're coming, he said, voice clipped. Claire's gaze darted to the files, the photos, the ledgers. Every instinct screamed to grab it all, to have proof in her hands. But the folder in her grip was already trembling. Logan caught her wrist. Not now. We live first. Then we burn them with the truth. She looked into his eyes and saw no room for debate, only the razor's edge of survival. Reluctantly, she shoved the most damning photos into the inside pocket of her jacket, just enough to light a fire later. Logan snapped the briefcase shut, tucking it under one arm. The scraping grew louder. Footsteps on the ladder. Logan moved to the door, motioning Rex to heel. The dog obeyed, muscles, taut eyes locked on the dark gap in the corridor. Claire's heart hammered against her ribs. She thought of the faces in those photographs, smiling in memory, silent in death. She thought of the storm outside, the endless white that could hide anything. She thought of the fact that if they didn't make it out now, she'd join that gallery of the lost. And then the first shadow fell across the concrete floor. Logan didn't wait. He slammed the sliding door shut with a crash, spun the locking wheel, and turned to Claire. There's another way out. Help me find it. Rex barked once, sharp and urgent, then dashed toward the far wall where a stack of crates sat skewed. Logan yanked one aside, revealing a low crawl space shrouded in cobwebs. Claire hesitated, but the pounding on the door jolted her into motion. She dropped to her knees and slid in after Rex, the briefcase clutched to her chest. The passage was narrow, the air thick with the taste of dust and rust. Behind them, metal screamed as someone tried to force the hatch. Logan crawled in last, pulling the crate back into place to hide the opening. They moved through the darkness, guided only by Rex's faint silhouette ahead. Every scrape of their boots, every ragged breath, every muffled thud from behind them felt amplified in the oppressive silence. Claire's mind replayed the photographs over and over, each face a promise she couldn't break. Finally, the crawlspace sloped upward. A faint glimmer of light seeped in from above, a snow-filtered glow. Rex squeezed through first, emerging into a small depression beneath a cluster of pine trees. Logan hauled Claire out and then climbed after her, his eyes scanning the tree line. The storm had muffled everything again. No footprints led here, no sign they'd been followed yet. Claire shivered not from the cold, but from the truth she carried inside her jacket. It was heavier than the snow pressing on the branches overhead. Logan's voice was low but steady. "We're not safe, but we're alive. That's enough for today." She met his gaze, her hands curling into fists. "No," she said quietly. "It's not enough. Not until they pay for every name in those files." Rex stood between them, head lifting toward the wind, as if already scenting the next step of their journey. The storm swirled on, erasing their tracks, but not the path ahead. The storm was easing, but the cold still bit through every layer as Logan guided Claire through the tree line, Rex padding close to her side as if he'd claimed her safety as his personal mission. The ground crunched beneath their boots, the wind howling like a restless ghost through skeletal pines. Claire didn't know where they were going, only that Logan's steps carried a kind of grim certainty. They broke through a stand of firs, and she saw it a squat wooden cabin, half buried in drifts, its roof sagging windows boarded over. Logan slowed, scanning the perimeter with an instinctive caution she'd come to recognize. He rapped twice on the warped door, then once more in a slower rhythm. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the door creaked open, just enough for a shadow to fill the frame. Hank. Claire had heard his name in passing, Logan's old partner from the bureau, the one who vanished after a case that never made the headlines. Now he stood before them, hair gone gray at the temples, eyes sharp and guarded. He took one look at Logan, at the bloodied tear in his jacket from the earlier firefight, then at Claire and Rex, before stepping back to let them in. The inside of the tram Keem Lum was as stripped and functional as a bunker. Bare walls, an old potbelly stove radiating just enough heat to make the air breathable, shelves lined with cans and faded maps. Hank didn't waste time with pleasantries. "You've got a tail?" he asked. "Probably," Logan said. "We need a place to lay low, and information." Hank's gaze flicked to Claire, measuring her. "She part of this. I'm the reason they're here." Claire admitted, her voice low but steady. That seemed to be enough for him. He motioned for them to sit, then pulled out a battered metal box from under the table. From it, he extracted a single manila folder, thick and weathered from years of handling. He slid it across to Logan, but it was Claire who reached for it, fingers trembling as she opened the flap. Inside were photographs, grainy surveillance stills, copies of contracts, and a profile she recognized instantly, Mason Kane. Hank leaned forward, his voice dropping into a tone that carried the weight of lived danger. "He's your problem. Mason Kane. Used to be head of security for the corporation you're tangling with. Not just muscle, he's a tactician, knows how to make people disappear without leaving a trace. And worse, he's got friends in places that should be keeping him in check." Claire stared at the image. Mason's face was all angles and shadows, the kind of face that didn't need a smile to unsettle you. "I've heard the name," she said quietly. "I didn't know he was this." "He's worse than you think," Hank replied. "I've crossed paths with him. You don't beat him by playing fair. You survive him by staying unpredictable." Logan's jaw tightened. "And he'll come for us before the storm's over." Rex, lying at Claire's feet, lifted his head at the shift in Logan's tone. His ears pricked tail still. Hank's gaze softened as he looked at the dog, a faint smile creasing his weathered face. "Good animal," he said, reaching down without hesitation. Rex sniffed his hand, then rested his chin on Hank's knee. In that moment, some of the tension in the cabin eased, as if the dog had decided Hank was one of theirs. For a few hours, there was something close to peace. Hank brewed coffee thick enough to chew Logan, patched the shallow wound in his shoulder, and Claire studied the maps Hank had spread across the table. Lines marked supply routes, surveillance blind spots, and most importantly, escape paths. The snow outside kept falling, muffling the world, giving them the illusion of safety. But safety was a brittle thing, and it didn't last. Miles away on a ridge cloaked in mist and frost, Mason Kane watched through high-powered binoculars. His breath didn't fog in the cold. He controlled even that, like a predator conserving energy before the strike. Through the glass, he saw movement in the cabin, caught the faintest glimpse of Logan's profile, the shadow of a woman's hair, the unmistakable bulk of a German shepherd. His lips curved, not in amusement, but in a cold satisfaction. They thought they'd slipped away, found a corner to hide in. He knew better. He could wait. The storm was his ally, and so was the fear that crept in when people thought they were safe. Back inside, Claire felt it, that prickle at the back of her neck, the phantom sense of being seen. She tried to shake it, focusing instead on the maps. "If we take this route," she said, tracing a line through a pass marked narrow, "we could reach the old highway by nightfall." "You could," Hank agreed. "If you don't mind walking into an ambush." Logan looked up sharply. "You think he's already positioned men there?" "I know he has," Hank said. "Kane doesn't leave choke points open. If he wanted you dead, you'd be dead. That means he's herding you towards something you haven't seen yet." The weight of those words settled heavily in the room. Claire glanced at Rex, who was watching the door, as though he too could feel the shift in the air. For a brief moment, Logan's eyes met Hank's, the unspoken history between them passing like a shadow. Whatever had fractured their partnership before the stakes now left no room for old grudges. Outside, the wind howled again, rattling the shutters. Mason's figure withdrew from the ridge, vanishing into the storm, but he left behind the certainty of his presence, a ghost in the snow closing in. The night had a way of swallowing sound in these mountains, but not tonight. Not with the forest breathing like a living thing, tense and waiting. Inside the old ranger station, the air was thick with the faint smell of oil lamps and wet timber. Outside, the wind combed through the pines, whispering in a language only predators understood. Rex's ears were the first to change, stiff, rigid, tuned to something beyond the range of human hearing. He was at the door in 3 silent steps, his body low nose twitching. Logan caught the shift instantly. He'd seen it in Afghanistan with working dogs right before the fight broke open. Rex wasn't curious. He was warning. Logan reached over the table and snuffed the lantern with a single puff of breath. "Claire," he whispered, already pulling her toward the rear hallway. "Move, now." Her voice trembled in the dark. "What?" A dull thump cut her words in half. Something small punched through the outer wall, embedding into the back of a chair. No crack of gunpowder, no echo suppressed fire. Logan's stomach clenched. Whoever was out there wasn't just probing. They were here to erase everyone inside. Rex growled low, a sound like gravel rolling in his chest, then bolted toward the front. Through the slats of the boarded windows, Logan saw shapes materializing in the tree line, 3, maybe 4, moving like shadows among shadows. Claire back door. Now. Logan's hand found the shotgun propped against the wall. Not ideal against long rifles, but in close quarters it could tear a hole in their line. From the corner, Hank was already moving, his old FBI reflexes snapping to life. He grabbed his rifle racked around and took position by the west window. "They're coming in tight," he muttered, scanning. Lethal entry. Another suppressed shot bit into the window frame inches from Hank's cheek. He didn't flinch. "Logan, get her out." "I'll hold." "Not leaving you," Logan snapped. "You don't have time to argue. This isn't a containment op, it's a wipeout." Hank's voice carried the weight of experience, the kind where you knew exactly how long you had before the world went red. The next moment detonated without warning. A clink on the floor. Then the sharp hiss of smoke. The room began to fill with thick burning white. Tear gas. Rex barked once, short, sharp, urgent, then lunged for Claire's sleeve, pulling her toward the back exit. "Go!" Hank barked, firing 2 sharp bursts through the window. Somewhere outside, a man shouted in pain. Logan yanked open the rear door. Cold air knifed in the night, swallowing them instantly. They bolted into the dark Rex, taking point. The gunfire behind them roared into a full exchange. Logan glanced back just once. Through the smoke-filled doorway, Hank's silhouette was framed against the flicker of muzzle flashes. Then a sharp wrong sound, a heavy impact followed by a strangled gasp. Logan froze, torn. Hank's voice cut through, raw but commanding. "Get her out of here by any means necessary." It was the kind of order you didn't disobey. Not because you didn't want to, because you couldn't. It was built into you by blood and years, and the unspoken bond of men who'd both walked through hell. Claire stumbled, coughing hard. Logan caught her arm and pushed her forward into the tree line. The forest closed around them, like a mouth. Behind them, the station was a dying animal, coughing fire and smoke into the night. Somewhere in the chaos, Hank's weapon sang its last note, replaced by the muffled thud of boots storming the interior. Claire tried to look back. "We can't." Logan said, his voice flat with the kind of grief that had no room for tears. "If we go back, we both die. And Hank dies for nothing." They moved fast, dodging between pines, hearts beating loud enough to feel in their throats. Rex kept glancing over his shoulder, ears pinned, his own urgency radiating like heat. A burst of automatic fire cracked through the forest behind them. No suppressors now, just raw, brutal sound. Mason Kane wasn't hiding anymore. They slid down a slope slick with pine needles. Claire tripped, half falling, but Logan was there, hauling her upright before her momentum could take her. Her face was pale in the moonlight, eyes wide and glassy. She'd been in danger before on missions and investigations, but this was different. This was personal. She had just watched someone she barely knew, but who had risked everything, take a bullet for her. The reality of what Hank had given them was still burning through her chest. They didn't stop until they reached a dry creek bed. The sound of the fight behind them dulled by distance. Logan crouched low, one hand on Rex's collar. "We rest here. 2 minutes, no more." Claire sank to her knees, her breath ragged. He knew, didn't he? That he wasn't coming out. Logan didn't answer right away. He watched the darkness above the creek, listening. Hank knew the math, he finally said. Sometimes the only way to protect someone is to give them the space to get away, even if it costs you everything. Her throat tightened. She didn't want to cry, tears felt useless here, but the heat behind her eyes betrayed her. She looked at Rex the way he sat between them, alert, protective, his chest heaving from the run. He stayed, so we could live. Logan met her gaze. That's what allies do, even the ones you only get to have for a few hours. They didn't move for those 2 minutes. The cold seeped into their bones, but neither complained. When they finally rose, it was with the silent understanding that every step forward was Hank's final order in motion. Far off, the glow of the burning station smeared against the low clouds, a wound in the night. Somewhere in that fire, Hank lay still. But in Claire's mind, his voice was alive, repeating those last 4 words like a promise she didn't yet know how to keep. And Mason Kane, somewhere in the blackness beyond the trees, was still hunting. The wind howled like the living thing, tearing through the skeletal black pines that flanked the gorge. The storm hadn't let up in hours, and now snow whipped in every direction, stinging exposed skin and turning breath into a sharp, fleeting mist. Logan kept his head low, one gloved hand gripping the icy steel cable that served as the only railing on the Black Ridge suspension bridge. Beneath the rotting planks under his boots, the river churned far below its surface, fractured with chunks of jagged ice. Every step felt like walking over the mouth of an open grave. Claire was just behind him, her hood pulled tight, scarf frozen stiff with frost. She didn't speak, every ounce of her concentration was locked on the treacherous path, each footfall deliberate. Rex stayed close to her flank, his body low, every muscle wound tight. The dog's ears twitched at every gust, every shift in the bridge's groaning cables. "This is suicide." Claire's voice was hoarse, carried away almost instantly by the wind. "We could have taken the ridge road." "They'll expect the ridge road." Logan cut her off without turning. His eyes scanned ahead, scanning for movement. "This way buys us time. Mason won't think we're dumb enough to try this in this weather." Except Mason Kane knew them better than either wanted to admit. Halfway across, Logan's instincts began screaming. It wasn't just the wind, the air had shifted the same way it did before a sniper took a shot. He slowed, forcing Claire to stop behind him, his hand tightening around the cold grip of his sidearm. Rex froze, nose lifting to taste the air body angling toward the right side of the bridge. And then Mason was just there. He emerged from the blowing snow like a ghost conjured from the storm. Broad-shouldered parka unzipped just enough to reveal the matte black steel of a pistol already leveled at Claire's chest. His expression was carved from stone, no emotion, no hesitation. Only the eyes cold, calculating, as if weighing the exact second it would take to end her life. "Drop it." Logan Mason's voice carried even over the wind. Years in command had given it a sharp edge that cut through chaos. "I only need her." Claire's breath hitched, but she didn't move. Her eyes flicked between Mason's gun and Logan's face. The bridge swayed under them, groaning as another blast of wind shoved it sideways. Logan shifted his weight, his mind already racing distance to Mason, 20 feet. Side rails, unreliable. Decking slick enough to send any misstep into the void. "You kill her. You don't get what you want." Logan called back, voice steady, even though his knuckles whitened around his gun. "We both know you still need leverage." Mason's lip curled almost a smile, but it didn't touch his eyes. "I can make do without. You've got nothing." The tension stretched like a wire ready to snap. Snow swirled around them, flakes catching in Rex's fur as he crouched, muscles bunching. The dog's amber eyes locked on Mason, reading every shift of weight, every flicker in his posture. It happened fast. A sharp crack of ice from somewhere above was all the distraction Rex needed. He lunged forward with an explosion of movement claws scraping against the frozen planks. Mason fired instinctively, the shot ripping past Claire's shoulder and punching into the bridge's side rail. The sound was deafening in the narrow gorge. Rex's teeth closed on Mason's forearm, the one holding the pistol, his growl a raw, savage sound that vibrated through the air. Logan moved at the same time, not forward, but to the left, toward the railing. The plan wasn't about overpowering Mason head-on. It was about shifting the fight's balance, literally. He grabbed a length of frayed support cable and yanked hard, throwing his weight to make the bridge sway violently. Claire understood instantly. She stepped into Mason's line, grabbing the pistol with both hands, just as Rex pulled him sideways. Mason's footing slipped on the ice-slick board's boots, skidding toward the edge. His other hand clawed for balance, but the bridge pitched again under Logan's calculated weight shift. "Now, Claire," Logan barked. With a burst of desperation, Claire twisted the pistol down and away. The gun went off again, the flash lighting Mason's snarl for a split second before Rex wrenched him further off balance. The steel frame of the bridge shuddered from the recoil, and Mason's boot hit a patch of black ice. In an instant, his center of gravity was gone. He didn't fall completely. Mason Kane wasn't the kind of man to die easy. One arm hooked around a support cable, keeping him suspended over the void. Snow blew past him into the darkness below, vanishing into the roar of the river. "Pull me up!" Mason snarled, spitting blood where Rex had torn skin. His eyes locked on Logan with a hate so pure it was almost palpable. "Or she dies screaming, 'You hear me?'" Logan didn't answer right away. He stood over Mason, breathing hard, weighing the truth in those words. Mason was dangerous, more dangerous than anyone Claire had ever faced. Leaving him alive meant he would keep coming, keep hunting. But killing him now wasn't clean, not without knowing exactly what else he had set in motion. Claire, still gripping the pistol, stepped back beside Logan. Her voice shook, but her words didn't. "He'll never stop." The bridge swayed again, wind slamming into them, with enough force to make all three shift involuntarily. Mason's grip on the cable tightened, knuckles white. Rex stood just behind Logan, fur-bristled lips curled in a low, rumbling snarl that spoke of unfinished business. Logan finally crouched his face inches from Mason's. "You know what's different between you and me," he said quietly, his voice cutting through the storm. "I can walk away." And he did. He pulled back, keeping his eyes locked on Mason's until the last possible second, then stepped away to Claire's side. Rex followed, never breaking his gaze from the dangling man. Mason cursed them, the words ripped apart by the wind. But Logan didn't look back again. They moved quickly, boots hammering against the frozen planks as the suspension bridge groaned beneath their combined weight. Every step away from Mason felt like another second bought another heartbeat, stolen from the enemy's grip. By the time they reached the far side, the storm was closing in completely, turning Mason's shape into a shadow swallowed by white. Logan's hand found Claire's shoulder, steadying her as her legs trembled from adrenaline and cold. "You all right?" he asked. Claire nodded once, the movement small, her breath still ragged. "I will be." They didn't linger. The storm wasn't letting up, and Mason Kane, if he survived that bridge, wouldn't either. The only way forward was through the blizzard toward whatever thin hope waited on the other side. But in the space between heartbeats, Logan knew one thing for certain. This fight was far from over. And the next time they saw Mason Kane, it wouldn't be on a swaying bridge in the middle of nowhere. It would be somewhere neither side could afford to lose. The storm had not let up. Snow tore sideways across the valley, each gust slicing through the cracks in the cabin walls where Logan had set them up for the night. Outside, the world was a violent white muffling, even the howl of distant wolves. Inside, the glow from a single kerosene lamp painted Logan's face in fractured gold and shadow. He leaned forward over the rough table elbows, planted eyes fixed on Claire, as if trying to convince her by force of will. Claire, his voice was low, almost drowned by the wind, hammering the walls. "We take this to the bureau. We do it by the book. Mason goes down legally. No blood, no martyrdom. We walk out alive." She sat opposite him, the flash drive in her hand, glinting faintly under the lamp. Her knuckles were pale from the grip, and the shadows under her eyes were darker than he'd ever seen. For a long moment, she said nothing, only staring at the metal stick as if it weighed more than any weapon. "You still believe the bureau's clean?" she asked finally, voice flat. "After what we've seen? After Hank's blood on that snow?" Logan's jaw tightened. He wanted to say yes, because once that had been his truth. But the images of men in tactical black moving like shadows through the storm with Mason at their head burned through his mind. Men who'd known exactly where to find them. Men who didn't hesitate to put bullets in their own. "Not all of them are dirty," he said. "There's a chance." Claire gave a humorless laugh. It was short, sharp, and it cut through him more than any scream. A chance. That's all Hank had, too. She looked up, her eyes catching his with something that was both fire and ice. I'm not putting this in the hands of another chain of command Mason owns. She reached into her jacket pocket, pulling out a battered satellite phone, one Logan didn't remember her carrying before. Its screen flickered to life with a weak green glow. She slid the flash drive into a tiny adapter and locked it into the phone. Claire Logan started, but she cut him off with a single glance. If we give it to the Bureau, maybe they bury it. Maybe Mason walks. But if I put it here, she tapped the phone, every journalist, every watchdog, every goddamn citizen with an internet connection will see it before morning. Mason can't make that disappear. Logan's pulse thudded against his ribs. You put that online, you're not just painting a target on your back. You're making it glow in the dark. He'll burn the whole state to get to you. She didn't look away from the tiny progress bar that had appeared on the screen inching forward. Then let him. I'm done hiding. The weight of her words filled the cabin heavy as the cold pressing in from outside. Rex stirred from his spot by the door, ears flicking back and forth as if he could sense the danger in her tone. You think you're ready for that kind of heat? Logan asked, his voice quieter now. He wasn't challenging her anymore. He was warning her. Claire's gaze softened for a fraction of a second. No one's ready for it, Logan. But Hank died because he believed in this. I'm not letting his death end in a sealed evidence locker. The wind rattled the windows, the sound almost like impatient fingers drumming on glass. Outside, snow lashed against the world with a fury that mirrored the pulse in Logan's temples. The upload ticked past 20%. Logan paced once across the narrow room, his boots crunching against grit on the floorboards. If you're going through with this, we need contingencies. Mason will know before the last file finishes. He'll send everything he's got. Claire gave the faintest nod. Then we make sure we're gone before he gets here. Logan's instincts screamed that this was reckless. But deep down he recognized something in her resolve. It was the same stubborn refusal he'd carried back when he still wore the badge and thought he could fix the world. Now, watching her in the lamplight, he wasn't sure if she was brave or if she was just standing on the edge of a cliff, too furious to care about the fall. The upload hit 40%. She sat, rigid eyes glued to the screen, while Logan moved through the cabin checking weapons, ammunition, exit points. The satellite phone's signal was weak, fighting the storm as much as they were, but steady. Once it's out there, Logan said from the doorway, there's no going back. They'll hit every contact you've ever had. Family, friends? I don't have those anymore, she said, not looking at him. They made sure of that years ago. 60%. The storm roared louder, and for a moment Logan thought he heard something under it, like the faint, distant hum of an engine. Rex's head lifted, ears snapping toward the sound. Logan froze, listening. There it was again, a low growl in the distance, too steady to be the wind. Snowmobiles. They're coming, he said sharply. Claire's hand tightened around the phone. Then they're right on schedule. Logan crossed the room, crouched beside her. We need to move the second that's done. She nodded without taking her eyes off the screen. 75%. Every second felt stretched, warped, like time itself was caught in the storm. Outside, faint lights flickered between the trees, cold blue-white against the black. Mason's men, 80%. Logan could feel his heartbeat in his fingertips. Rex let out a low, rumbling growl that vibrated through the floor. 90%. Claire Logan started, but she shushed him without looking. 98, 99. Complete. The moment the bar vanished, she yanked the drive free, shoved the phone into her jacket, and met his eyes with something fierce. It's done. Logan grabbed his rifle, Rex already at his side, and together they moved for the back door. Snow whipped into the cabin as he kicked it open, the cold biting like teeth. Behind them, through the front windows, beams of light cut through the storm, Mason's hunters closing in. As they plunged into the night, Logan realized the truth. They hadn't just survived the storm, they'd started one. The storm hadn't let up. Blackridge lay under a sky the color of bruised iron, the wind cutting through the streets like it had teeth. Claire stood in the narrow alley behind a boarded-up diner, her breath showing in sharp bursts, the glow of Logan's phone screen lighting the hard lines of his face. He'd been scanning feeds for hours, but now his jaw locked. They're moving faster than I thought, he said, showing her the headlines. Claire didn't need to read them twice. Every major outlet, every blog, every gossip account, each one screaming the same carefully crafted lies. Eco-terrorist, corporate saboteur, murder suspect. Some went further, claiming she'd been paid by foreign interests to destabilize the country. Others hinted she and Logan were lovers on the run, manipulating public sympathy for personal gain. Her stomach turned, not because she believed a single word, but because she knew how quickly people would. They're not just going after you, Logan said, scrolling to another post. A grainy shot of him at a gas station last week had been repurposed into a wanted-style graphic, the caption reading, Former cop turned rogue enforcer. Dangerous. Approach with caution. They want us isolated, Claire murmured. She could feel the machine moving now, an invisible tide pulling every rumor into one coordinated narrative. If we can't be trusted, then nothing we say matters. They're also pushing the angle that Rex is a stolen military asset. At the sound of his name, Rex lifted his head from where he was lying near the alley wall, ears twitching. His breath steamed in the cold, his eyes locked on Logan, as if asking for the rest of the sentence. They want to take him from us, Logan finished quietly. Claire crouched, scratching behind Rex's ears. Not happening, she whispered. Rex pressed his weight into her knee, as if agreeing. That's when the shouting started. They stepped out from the alley, into the main street, the cold slicing between buildings. A group of locals stood near the hardware store's porch, their faces half hidden by scarves and shadow. One man in a green hunting jacket pointed straight at Claire. That's her. That's the woman from the news. Half the group froze, the others murmuring. A tall woman with a sheriff's badge on her beanie stepped forward. You're trespassing on private property, ma'am. Maybe you should head out before there's trouble. Logan's hand twitched toward his coat pocket, not for a weapon, but for the old reflex of keeping a shield between her and a potential threat. We're not here to start anything, he said evenly. We're just passing through. The tall woman's eyes flicked to Rex, then back to Claire. Passing through with a dog like that? She didn't say military asset, but Claire heard it all the same. Someone in the crowd muttered, "They're both criminals," and another voice shot back. "She's the only reason those files came out." The argument swelled sharp with winter air and suspicion. And then Rex moved. It was subtle, a shift of weight, a low growl like distant thunder. His body angled so he was between Claire and the nearest man in the group, his gaze unblinking. He wasn't snarling, but his presence carried the warning of a locked gate with something dangerous behind it. Claire didn't have to look down to know his stance, back legs, braced head low, every muscle ready. He was telling them, "You'll have to go through me." The woman with the badge took a step back. "Call your dog off," she said, but her voice had lost its edge. "He's not attacking," Claire replied. "He's protecting." They kept walking. Rex didn't break position until they'd turned the corner and were out of sight. Back in the safe house, a converted storage shed on the edge of town. Logan paced while Claire sat at the table with her laptop open. Every few minutes, she'd hear the faint sound of Rex's claws on the floor as he made his rounds between the front and back doors. Even here, even behind locked walls, he acted like every minute was borrowed. "This is how they'll crush us," Logan said finally. "Not with bullets. With doubt. They've already got people pointing fingers in the street," Claire said without looking up. "If we stay hidden, we look guilty. If we go public again, they'll smear us harder." Logan stopped pacing. "You're thinking of pushing back?" Claire met his eyes. "No, I'm thinking of flipping the board." She showed him a post, one she'd been drafting quietly for the last hour. It wasn't defensive. It wasn't an explanation. It was more documents, more names, more proof. And it came with a challenge. "Here's the evidence. Check it yourself. If you think I'm lying, prove it." "That's not going to make them stop," Logan warned. "It'll make them come harder." "They're coming anyway," she said. "At least this way, people who've been told to hate me will see something they can't unsee." Before Logan could argue, Rex's growl rolled through the shed like a living alarm. Claire was on her feet instantly. Rex was at the front door, staring through the narrow gap in the curtain. Logan crossed the room in 2 strides, easing the curtain aside just enough to see a pair of headlights idling at the end of the gravel drive. "Same SUV from earlier," he muttered. "They've been following since Main Street." The growl deepened and Rex's hackles lifted. The SUV didn't move, but the presence of it pressed on the air like a weight. Logan killed the lights inside, motioning Claire to stay low. They waited. 5 minutes. 10. The SUV finally reversed its taillights, vanishing into the storm. But Rex didn't relax until the sound of its engine had faded completely. Over the next 2 days, the campaign against them intensified. Flyers appeared on telephone poles, blurry photos of Claire, words like traitor and wanted for questioning stamped in red. At the grocery store, a clerk refused to ring up their supplies, turning his back while muttering into a phone. Someone spray-painted "Get out" on the side of the shed. Through it all, Rex was a shadow at their heels. When Claire stepped outside, he moved ahead first, scanning the street before letting her follow. At night, he slept in the narrow hallway between their rooms, the perfect choke point for anyone trying to force entry. More than once, Claire woke to the sound of his low, steady breathing and felt a strange sense of safety settle in her chest. But safety was temporary. Logan's sources were feeding him fragments of worse to come, talk of bounty hunters of a citizen's arrest being organized in town. The groups funding the smear campaign weren't content with public humiliation. They wanted a show of force. It came on the third night. They were halfway down a side street when two men stepped out from between parked cars, blocking the way. Both carried the casual confidence of people who'd been told they were in the right. One had a phone recording the other, a metal bat resting against his shoulder. "You're Claire, right?" the man with the phone asked. "Why don't you tell my followers how much they paid you to sell us out?" Claire didn't move. Rex did. He was between them before the bat could shift teeth bared just enough to flash in the streetlight. The man with the phone cursed and stumbled back, the recording tilting toward the ground. "You call him off the bat," that Batman said, trying to sound in control but not quite managing it. "Or, you swing that thing," Logan cut in, "and you'll never get it back." For a long moment, no one moved. The wind whipped down the street carrying the smell of snow and the distant rumble of a plow. Then the man with the bat took a step back, muttering something neither Claire nor Logan caught. The two men vanished into the dark. Claire looked at Rex, his body still tense, his eyes locked on where they'd stood. She crouched, pressing her forehead to his for just a second. "You're the only reason we're still standing," she whispered. Rex blinked once, then turned to scan the street again. Claire hadn't seen her younger brother in almost 12 years. It wasn't just distance that had kept them apart. It was the hard, jagged wall of silence that had grown between them after their parents' deaths. She'd gone her way chasing the truth and digging into shadows that most people didn't even want to acknowledge. He'd stayed in their hometown, keeping his head down, trying to live a normal life. And now here she was, standing on his doorstep in the freezing wind, Rex sitting at her side like a silent sentinel. Her hand hovered over the doorbell longer than it should have. Her fingers were trembling, not from the cold, but from the weight of everything she was about to unload on him. Once she told him the truth, there would be no turning back. She took a deep breath, pressed the button, and heard the faint chime echo inside. The door opened slowly, revealing a man she barely recognized. Daniel. Older now, his shoulders broader, his eyes sharper, though they still carried that same guarded caution she remembered from their childhood. For a moment, he simply stared at her, not moving, as if trying to decide whether the person in front of him was real. "Claire," he finally said, his voice low. "You shouldn't be here." She swallowed. "I know, but I didn't come for comfort. I came for the truth. And for you to hear it from me before you hear it from someone else." Daniel's jaw tightened, but he stepped aside. "Come in." Rex padded in first, scanning the living room like a bodyguard before sitting between the two siblings. Claire noticed Daniel glance at the dog with curiosity, but said nothing. They sat down across from each other. For a few seconds, neither spoke. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, each sound a reminder of how much time they had wasted in silence. Finally, Claire started. "Everything you've heard about me, about what I've done, it's not the full story. And I can't live with you believing the worst about me anymore." Daniel leaned back, crossing his arms. "The news says you stole classified documents, that you're making enemies of some very dangerous people." "That's true, but not in the way they make it sound." Her voice cracked, but she didn't stop. "These documents, they're not just files. They're proof. Proof of what happened to Dad before he died. Proof of how Mom was silenced. And proof that what's been poisoning this town comes from higher up than anyone wants to admit." Daniel's expression shifted just slightly, but enough for her to see the crack in his skepticism. "You're saying this is connected to them?" "Yes," she said, leaning forward, her eyes burning. "I didn't risk my life to stir trouble, Daniel. I did it because I couldn't watch their names be buried under lies any longer." He looked down at his hand, silent for a long time. "You could have told me before," he said, finally. Her voice softened. "I thought I was protecting you. I thought if you didn't know, you couldn't be dragged into it." And now, he asked, looking up at her, "now it's too big to keep you out of it?" "They'll come for me, Daniel. And maybe for you. I can't pretend anymore." Daniel exhaled slowly, his eyes searching hers as though trying to find the sister he'd lost. "All these years? I thought you left because you didn't care." Claire's throat tightened. "I never stopped caring. I just didn't know how to come back without bringing all of this with me." The room felt heavy with unspoken words. Rex shifted, resting his head on Daniel's knee as if sensing the weight of the moment. Daniel's hand hesitated, then gently stroked the dog's fur. It was the smallest gesture, but it felt like a bridge being built between them. Claire's eyes stung. "I don't want us to stay strangers. If something happens to me—" "Don't," Daniel cut in sharply. "Don't talk like that." "I have to," she insisted. "If something happens, I need you to know why I did this. And I need you to remember me for who I am, not who they say I am." His eyes glistened. "You were always the stubborn one. And you were always the one worth fighting for," she replied. The storm outside howled, rattling the windows. But inside, something was shifting. Daniel's guarded posture eased. His voice was quieter when he spoke again. "So what now?" "I keep going," she said simply. "I finish what I started. But I'd like to know you're with me, at least in here." She touched her chest. Daniel was silent for a long moment, then nodded once. "I can't fight your fight. But I can stop pretending you're the villain. You're still my sister." The tears came before she could stop them. She reached across the table and Daniel took her hand. Rex, sensing the change, moved between them, pressing his head against both their arms, like some living connection holding them together. They stayed like that, for a long while, three figures in a small room, while the world outside raged. And for the first time in years, Claire felt something warm in her chest. Not safety, she knew too well that was an illusion, but something close to it. Something like belonging. "You remember the summer we built that treehouse?" Daniel asked suddenly. Claire laughed softly through her tears. "You mean the one that collapsed 2 days later, because you refused to follow my blueprint?" He smiled faintly. "Yeah, I missed that. I missed us." "Me too," she whispered. Outside, the snow kept falling, the wind kept screaming. But inside that house, the distance between them was shrinking. They talked long into the evening about their parents, about the years they had lost, about the dangers still ahead. And though they didn't say it outright, they both knew this might be the last peaceful moment they'd have for a long time. When Claire finally stood to leave, Daniel walked her to the door. "You be careful," he said. "I will, and—" "Thank you," she replied. As she stepped out into the snow, Rex close at her side, she glanced back. Daniel was still at the doorway watching her. Not with suspicion this time, but with something else, something like trust. And that was enough to carry her forward no matter what the storm threw at her next. The storm had long since passed, but the air in Black Ridge still carried that strange electric heaviness that followed any upheaval. Snowbanks were piled high along the streets, glistening under a pale winter sun. But no one in town was looking at the weather anymore. All eyes were fixed on what Claire had unleashed. For days, headlines had screamed across every network. Corporate magnates, political figures, and shadow operatives splashed across front pages in grainy photographs. Their names paired with charges so severe they could topple careers overnight. The files she had leaked were already a tidal wave. Now, they had become a full-on tsunami. Federal task forces swept into the region like hunters with the scent of blood fresh in their lungs. The information Claire had dumped onto the public net was more than enough to give prosecutors teeth. Within 48 hours, subpoenas were flying, bank accounts were frozen, and a dozen executives found themselves pulled from corner offices and escorted past flashing cameras in handcuffs. In D.C., Mason's name was suddenly being whispered in corridors where people had once feared even speaking it aloud. Now he was no longer an untouchable phantom. He was prey. Claire watched it unfold from the corner booth of a small diner on Main Street. Her coffee going cold as the muted TV over the counter streamed live footage from the Capitol. Mason stood in the center of a chaotic courtroom. Press gaggle, his once impeccable suit, rumpled jaw clenched. Cameras zoomed in on him as he barked denials into the chaos. But there was something brittle in his voice now, a strain that couldn't be hidden from the lens. The man who had orchestrated so much darkness was suddenly reduced to defending himself like a drowning man swatting at shadows. Logan slid into the booth across from her, Rex at his heel. The dog's amber eyes scanned the room before settling tail-thumping once on the tile. "They got him," Logan said quietly, though his voice carried a measured caution. "But you know how men like him work. He'll throw every dollar, every contact into tearing this apart before it sticks." Claire didn't take her eyes off the screen. "I know," she said, her tone sharp, but laced with a weariness that went bone deep. "But it's already too late for him. The court of public opinion's already sentenced him. Even if he slips out of this, he's finished." She was right, and Logan knew it. The tide had shifted. Victims who had once hidden in fear were stepping forward, emboldened by her audacity. Women and men from 3 different states, each with a story about intimidation threats and the suffocating weight of a system built to protect men like Mason, were now making their way to the witness stand. Each voice added another crack to the facade Mason had built, and soon the cracks were spiderwebbing faster than anyone could patch them. The first day of Mason's trial was a spectacle. The courthouse in Black Ridge, usually a sleepy building with creaky floors and sun-faded blinds, was transformed into the beating heart of a national drama. Satellite vans lined the street, and reporters shouted questions from behind police barricades. Inside, the temperature felt charged, like the air before lightning strikes. Claire took her seat quietly in the back row. She didn't need to be in the front. She just needed to see him to watch the man who had built his empire on silence now be forced to listen. Logan sat beside her, posture straight, but relaxed, the kind of quiet presence that carried its own weight. Rex lay across their feet like a sentinel, occasionally lifting his head whenever the tension in the room shifted. One by one, the witnesses spoke. A former logistics officer, his hands trembling as he described the movement of illicit cargo under the cover of legitimate shipments. A young woman whose voice shook at first, then steadied as she recounted the threats that had driven her into hiding for years. Each testimony was like another shovel of dirt on Mason's grave. Claire felt the strangest mix of emotions: vindication, sorrow, relief. This wasn't just about winning. It was about truth carving its way through the rot. And yet the more she watched, the more she realized that victory wasn't clean. For every truth spoken, there were people in that room shifting uncomfortably. People who had once been part of Mason's circle, now pretending they'd had no idea. The hypocrisy was almost as heavy as the justice being dealt. On the third day, Mason finally took the stand. The room went still, the kind of silence that feels like it's leaning in to listen. He was calm, calculated, speaking with the precision of a man who'd spent his life bending narratives to his will. But Claire saw its small cracks in his performance. A muscle twitch in his jaw when a prosecutor pressed too hard. A pause that lasted one heartbeat too long when asked about offshore accounts. The man who once made entire rooms bend around him was now on the defensive. By the end of the week, the trial had become an open wound for Mason's network. More arrests followed, some of them people who had been sitting in the gallery days before feigning innocence. One of Mason's own attorneys was indicted for evidence tampering. The empire wasn't just falling, it was cannibalizing itself. That night, Claire and Logan walked home together through the cold Rex, trotting slightly ahead, his breath visible in the frosty air. Street lamps glowed against the snow, casting halos of light that felt almost surreal after the darkness of the courthouse. Logan's voice broke the quiet. "You could have gone back, you know. After this, the Bureau would take you in a heartbeat. You'd have your badge back." She shook her head, smiling faintly but without humor. "I don't want the badge. I don't want DC or the politics or the handshakes that mean nothing. This," she gestured toward the dark, quiet streets of Blackridge, "this is where I want to be." He studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Guess that makes two of us." And so it was decided, without another word. They would stay. No grand declarations, no mapped-out plans. Just a shared understanding that their fight here was over and their lives could finally belong to them again. In the weeks that followed, the noise around the trial began to fade. Mason was convicted on multiple counts, the sentencing broadcast nationwide. He wouldn't see the outside of a prison for decades, and even then, he'd emerge into a world that had moved on without him. The network he had commanded was gutted, its influence fractured beyond repair. And while new shadows would always creep into places like Blackridge, this particular one had been burned away. Life began to return to something resembling normal. Claire found herself waking up without that immediate jolt of dread in her chest. Logan spent more time working on the cabin he'd been restoring, hands busy with wood and tools instead of firearms and files. Rex, ever watchful, learned to relax again, though he still walked between them when they ventured into town, as if guarding not just their safety, but the fragile peace they'd earned. One late afternoon, they stood at the edge of the frozen lake, just beyond the tree line. The sun was sinking, painting the ice in shades of gold and rose. Claire looked out over the stillness, then down at Rex, who was watching the horizon with the same alertness he always had. "We did it," she said quietly, almost to herself. Logan glanced at her, then at the dog. "No," he corrected softly. "We survived it. That's different. And maybe that's better." Claire didn't argue. She knew he was right. Survival wasn't as clean as victory, but it was something you could carry forward, something that shaped the way you lived afterward. And in this small corner of the world, for now, that was enough. Rex pressed his head against her leg, and she rested her hand on his thick fur. In that moment, she realized the fight had been worth every scar. Because in the end, they hadn't just taken down a man, they had dismantled a system, and in doing so, they had found a life worth living in the quiet that followed. The snow in Blackridge always had a way of swallowing sound. It muffled the echo of boots on the old wooden sidewalks, softened the grind of tires against ice, and turned conversations into whispers, even when voices were raised. That morning, the town felt even quieter than usual, as though it was holding its breath for something it knew was about to change. By the time the first rays of sunlight slipped through the jagged ridge to the east, Claire had already gone. No fanfare. No goodbyes at the train station. No trail of suitcases. Just absence sudden and complete like a star winking out in the night. Logan found the envelope on his porch just after dawn, frost clinging to its edges. The handwriting was unmistakable. Her handwriting was all edges and sharp turns, as though she had never learned how to write without urgency. Inside was a single page, and on it in thick black ink a sentence that looked as if it had been written in one unbroken breath. "There are truths no one should own, only set free." The words didn't explain her departure, but Logan understood her better than most. Claire was not built for permanence. She was a storm in human form, blowing into people's lives to tear away the lies and rot, then leaving them with air they could finally breathe. She had done her part in Blackridge, and now she was giving the town a gift it might not even realize. It needed the chance to heal without her shadow. Word of her leaving spread in hushed conversations at the diner and over coffee in the hardware store. Some called her a hero. Others muttered that she had stirred up more trouble than she had fixed. But beneath every opinion was a new, unshakable reality. Blackridge was no longer the place it had been before she came, and at the center of it all was Rex. The German shepherd had been at Claire's side through every storm. Now, with her gone, he seemed to carry her absence like a mantle. Kids in town began to treat him like a living legend. They followed him through the snow, leaving trails of little boot prints behind his paw marks. Some brought him scraps of jerky or the occasional tennis ball. One afternoon, 2 weeks after Claire left, the elementary school held an art contest. The winning picture was drawn by a girl named Hannah, a shy third grader who had once been too afraid to walk to school alone. Her drawing showed Rex standing tall on a snowy ridge, the wind bending the pines behind him, his eyes fixed on something distant but certain. The caption she'd scrawled beneath it read, "Rex, the Protector." By spring, the local woodcarver had taken it a step further. Using reclaimed cedar, he began shaping a statue of Rex, capturing every ripple of fur and the quiet power in his stance. When it was finished, the town council voted unanimously to place it in the square facing the courthouse. It was more than just a tribute to a dog. It was a reminder of a chapter the town couldn't forget, no matter how divided they had been. Logan kept his distance from the attention. He wasn't interested in the speeches or the ceremonies. He had seen too much of how quickly people turned public gratitude into something hollow. Instead, he stayed close to the edges of town, fixing up the old cabin he'd bought on the ridge. It was there, away from the noise, that he felt Claire's absence most. Some nights he would sit on the porch with Rex lying at his feet, the air sharp with pine and the sky heavy with stars. He'd think about the way Claire's eyes lit up when she uncovered a piece of truth, or the edge in her voice when she refused to back down. He'd wonder where she was now, some city halfway across the country, or maybe somewhere quieter where no one knew her name. One evening, after a late snowfall, Logan pulled on his coat and stepped outside with Rex. The world had gone white again, the kind of white that swallowed the horizon and blurred the line between earth and sky. They walked without speaking, without destination, just letting their boots and paws press new paths into the untouched snow. The ridge was steep, but Rex climbed it with the same steady determination he had in every fight they'd faced together. At the top, Logan paused, catching his breath. Below them, the town's lights twinkled like a scattering of gold coins, fragile against the vastness of the night. Then slowly, the horizon began to change. The first light of dawn crept over the mountains, washing the snow in shades of pale gold and rose. The air felt different, warmer, even though the temperature hadn't changed. Logan glanced down at Rex, whose gaze was fixed on the sunrise, as though he understood what it meant. And maybe he did. Claire's war was over. The lies had been ripped open, the guilty exposed. Mason and his network were behind bars. The survivors, those who had been silenced for too long, were speaking their voices, no longer trembling. And though scars remained, there was something in the air now that hadn't been there before. Hope. Logan let out a slow breath, his chest loosening in a way it hadn't for years. He reached down, resting a gloved hand on Rex's head. "We made it through," he said softly. The wind caught his words and carried them into the mountains. Rex didn't move, just leaned into his touch. Somewhere out there, Claire was walking her own path alone, but not lonely. She had left her mark on Blackridge, on Logan, on Rex. And maybe that was the point. Not to stay and be the hero forever, but to plant something strong enough to grow without her. As the sun climbed higher, the snow began to glitter every crystal, catching the light like it had been waiting for this moment. Logan and Rex stood there a while longer side by side until the day fully claimed the ridge. Then they turned and began the walk back down their shadows, stretching long and unbroken across the snow. Two figures moving steadily forward into whatever came next. And behind them in the square, the statue of Rex stood guard over Blackridge, its cedar frame weathering under the mountain sky, watching as life in the town went on. A living memory, a silent promise, a legacy of freedom.